Daddy's making resin mess again.
Hopefully this is something you've never really seen before. I've made eyeballs before, but not with wood and opals. We're going to be using these man-made opals for this project. I'm starting with this big block of dry yew that I've had for several years, and I'm putting it between centres on the lathe, and I'm going to turn it to round. I had a lot of promise, this piece of wood, but it was a bit of a so-and-so in the end. I start with a spindle roughing gouge, but this was proving hard work and the grain was all over the place. So I switched to a half-inch bowl gouge, a lovely sharp one, and this was a lot easier getting it to round. Once I'd got it to a cylinder, I could then start considering the blank and where we were going to get the sphere out of it to make the eyeball. This is me having a look. There were several bad inclusions and knots and cracks and things, and I was trying to work out the best part of the blank to get a decent sphere out of. Using my easy chuck there, and I'm measuring the diameter of the blank, and I'm using that measurement to mark out the length of the bit I need. Just defining that with an Easy Wood Tools parting tool. Marking the centre, and I'm now marking out the measurements for an octagon. Reducing the spindle down to the length of the diameter matching the length of one of the sides, parting off the bit I don't need. And here I am joining up the line with the spindle to form an octagon. Just using a spindle gouge here. And the other end. Then once I've got that nice octagon shape, like that, I can mark it out again for a hexadecagon, a 16-sided shape. Reducing the spindle down to the new size, matching the length of one of the sides. Then I'm going to join up all the lines to form a hexadecagon. Once you get to this stage, you're almost at a sphere, really. Just joining up the lines. Taking my time. The more accurately you do this bit, the easier the next stage is, although the next stage was a real swine. Here I'm taking off all the corners and getting it round. Just using a really big scraper here, big flat nose scraper, square nose scraper to round everything off. And just parting it off now. Finishing off with a saw. Now I've put it between cup centres, and I was struggling with this piece of wood. I had to keep going over and over with a bowl gouge, gently between the cup centres, trying to get it to round. There were bits of wood flying off.
That could have gone better, Daddy.
Nasty inclusions. It was a mess. Just super gluing the bark inclusion to stabilise it. After much cursing, swearing and sanding, gouging, I've actually got this to a sphere, but huge lumps were coming off. I've got some holes in it, there's cracks in it. It's not a very good piece of wood, but it's now been covered with acrylic sanding sealer, and I'm going to try and see how well it holds on the vacuum chuck for the next stage. So here it is on the vacuum chuck, and I'm using a Forstner bit to drill out the hole for the pupil, and I'm lining it up with the bit of wood that flew off this, marking out the pupil size, the iris size, using the dividers. I'm just using a parting tool and a little Easy Wood micro tool here, a little micro rougher, to hollow out the bit for the iris. There you go. Using some terracotta milliput as wood filler, just filling in a few of the voids. Matte black spray paint. That was for the the inside of the pupil. And here I am marking out the iris on some plasticard, which is styrene sheet. Once I've marked it out, I'm cutting it out very carefully with a very sharp scalpel. And I'm thinning the edge of the pupil here, the edge of the iris where the pupil is. Test fitting it. The pupil's smaller than the hole drilled in the wood. To give it some depth, mixing up some fast set epoxy resin. I'm just adding some little random streaks around the edges of the iris and the pupil. Laying on some gold leaf. Just tamping that down. Once it's dry, it was set, I'm brushing away the gold leaf that's not stuck down. It leaves it edged with gold like that. Scratching in some detail because it looked a little bit too blingy. Looked a bit too costume jewellery like, so I'm adding some texture as well. That's looking more like it now. A bit more random. And these are easy Inlay Opals. And in 3 different colours, and these are man-made opals. They're made in a laboratory. Here's the Easy Inlay website. I'll put links to all this in the description. Using some slow set epoxy now, and I'm very carefully placing these opals with tweezers into position. I'm putting the blue on the inside edge, green on the outside edge, and the Krakatoa colour in the middle band. But these are available from Scott Grove's Easy Inlay site, and if you're in the UK, Peter Sefton's site, and I'll put links to both of those in the description. Just putting some epoxy in to glue the iris into place, and using a funnel here which I've cut up to form a mould or a mould housing. Good old hot glue, mould maker's friend, just to seal that down onto the eyeball, and then it's ready for the casting. And this is Opticast 2000, which is a water clear casting resin from MBFG in Belfast. I'll put links to that as well so you can find it. This is my favourite resin. I'm mixing this up, making sure I don't get too much air into it, and then I'm pouring that into the mould. I'm trying to make sure I don't trap any air behind the iris. I'm just gently pouring that in. Then tip it around a little bit, make sure you don't trap any air. Topping it up. Once that's done, you got to top it up slightly higher than you need so you can cut it back. Covering it over just to keep dust out. Then it goes into the pressure pot up to 60 psi for several hours until fully cured, leaving the compressor attached so it can keep the pressure up. I left it overnight, and then here it is. Fantastic result. Very pleased with that.
Ooh, sparkly.
Then a case of getting it back on the lathe, using the vacuum chuck and tailstock as support, and turning that resin away. I'm using a negative rake tip on my number 1 hollower from Easy Wood Tools, so we're not getting any chipping out. Just taking off all these lovely ribbon shavings. Take it as far as I can with the tailstock in place for safety, and then I'm using my Merlin 2 to do the shaping and sanding. Yeah, just adjusting the position so it's running true on the vacuum chuck. A little bit of sanding, getting rid of that high milliput. And then I'm using the Merlin 2 again here to just sand it round, making sure everything's smooth. Forcing a bit again, and I'm drilling into what will be the bottom of the eyeball to create a hole to put some ballast in, because I want it to sit the correct way up so that it's looking at you. Hollowing out that hole a little bit, creating an undercut just so I can fit a bit more ballast in. And there it is. And then taking a piece of U branch, putting that between centres, turning it to round, and starting off with just a spindle gouge here. Doing the measurement of the Forstner bit, I used to drill the ballast hole, and I'm then matching that diameter to this, what's going to be a plug. Just test fitting. And I'm using some lead shot. Just pouring that in, shaking it down. That's about right. Then I'm pouring some resin into the shot. Just a bit of epoxy resin, and tamping that down into the shot. And then using the same epoxy to fix the plug into place. Shortened it down a bit, and that's the same piece of yew. Next day is back on the lathe, tailstock support, turn away the bung and then sand it again. Using the Merlin 2 again. And there it is, getting there. You can begin to see the opals again now. Then 2 coats of acrylic sanding sealer from Chestnut Products. Make sure it's all thoroughly sealed. I denibbed between coats. I'm just doing a lot of fine hand sanding here and using micro mesh on the lens up to 12,000. Then Chestnut Products acrylic lacquer. Well, there it is after several coats of lacquer. I'm going to have to denib it a little bit. There's a few little bubbles in the lacquer, and then we're going to buff it up. But it's come out surprisingly well considering the not very good wood. After a little fine sanding of those blips, I gave it a final buff on the buffing wheel with some Vonax. Finished at last. This was a long project. I had a lot of trouble with the wood. There was a lot of cracks in it, and this huge bark inclusion running through it, which wasn't very stable. It was a difficult blank to read. I was trying to work out where the best part of the blank was to get my sphere out of, and I thought that this inclusion would have virtually run itself out at the point I chose, but in actual fact it turned deeper at that point, so that was a bit of a pain. But there were several cracks running through, and I did lose a big chunk off the sphere when I was turning it, and that was largely what dictated to me where I had to put the iris and the pupil. In actual fact, the cracks are barely visible now it's been lacquered. This is my first, I think it's the first lacquered piece I've done. I've done some tool handles that were lacquered and things, but I think this is my first YouTube project that I've done a lacquer finish. And I use Chestnut Products acrylic lacquer, and it's amazing. I mean, it's come out like glass, and that's what I wanted. I wanted the whole thing to be shiny. The lens isn't lacquered, that's just the resin. That's the Opticast 2000 resin. It's really come out lovely, and the fire in these opals from Scott Grove are just fantastic. I'll put links to Scott's Easy Inlay website where he sells the opals, and I'll put links to Peter Sefton's website because he's selling them in the UK, and I'll also put links to MBFG where I get the resin that I've done the front with. But I'm very delighted. I think I made the best of a bad piece of wood. It didn't go exactly as to planned, because I turned the sphere first before turning the sphere into an eyeball. And really what I originally planned was to turn virtually the whole sphere but leave it still attached to wood fixed in the chuck. Hollow out the pupil so that there was a lot more resin in there, so the pupil had even more depth to it. And while it was on the lathe, and actually do the iris and the lens and do all that while it was still on the chuck. But it didn't work out that way. It would have been a lot easier and a lot quicker if it had. But the vacuum chuck rescued me, and the Merlin too also was a great help at doing final shaping. But it's come out very well. I'll try and get some better shots to show you the opals. I can't describe how beautiful they are, really. It's very difficult on camera to show you the change. They go from sort of a bluey green to red, and yeah, amazing. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please like, share and subscribe. Give me a thumbs up, it's a massive help. And I'll be back soon with some more videos. Lots of shots now of me rolling this around, trying to show you the fire in these opals. They're really beautiful, but very difficult to capture on camera. It's a case of just when they catch the light at a certain angle, and they're just beautiful. But they don't look as bright when they're in the little tub before you put the resin on. The resin really brings them to life. These are real opal, but they're made in a laboratory rather than dug out of the ground. They have the advantage that the water part of the matrix has been replaced with resin, so they should keep their fire. Here I'm just demonstrating that ballast, which shows that it wobbles around but always keeps the correct way up. Yeah, there are lots of possibilities with these opals, and I'm sure to be doing some more projects with them at some point. But, well, like I say, I'll put links to where you can get hold of them. That's a better shot. That's a thumbnail. There we go. I shall be back soon with some more videos. So subscribe and hit that bell. Give me a thumbs up. See you soon.
Please like, share and subscribe. My daddy needs all the help he can get. More rubbish coming soon.
On the 28th of June of this year, 2019, I'm going to be giving a live evening demo at Yandles Woodworking Centre down in Martock in Somerset. I'll be using easy wood tools and showing how to get the best from them. But if you're in the area, come by and say hi.